Tonight we continue our series of interviews with candidates for Boston City Council in the election next Tuesday. That's November 3rd. Our guest is one of the 4 at-large councilors running for re-election. We'd like to welcome Michael Flaherty. Thank you very much for being with us.
Hey, thank you for having me again, Chris.
First of all, talk about something that you've done in your last 2 years that you think people should know more about.
Well, we've put legislation forward to increase the residency period by which you can sit for the police and fire test. We're expanding it to 3 years to give city kids a chance and an opportunity to become a police officer or a firefighter. 1 year, obviously, you have to take the civil service test, and there's the veterans preference issue. But what we saw was that they're also competing against suburban applicants who grew up in the suburbs and went to school in the suburbs and played sports in the suburbs, but yet come in, take the test, and then after they find out how they score, they decide whether or not they want to move in or not, or they want what's called a mattress address. They want to bunk in with some other folks, or maybe move in with a relative. So this is I guess a common sense solution to increase opportunities for city kids to, and also will help diversify both the police and the fire department. And also linkage. I've reinstituted discussions around increasing the linkage formula. Boston is becoming the city of the very rich and the very poor. We're seeing Boston almost being Manhattanized. And so linkage with respect to large-scale development projects on the commercial development side, anything over 100,000 square feet, there's a certain percentage that's set aside for the creation of affordable housing through the Housing Trust. And there's also some money set aside for job creation and job training. I want to increase the percentages for both the housing and the job creation so that we can give working families, folks on fixed income, an opportunity to stay in the city, and also hopefully give them an opportunity to compete in the workforce. We boast of having the best colleges and universities in the world, and we're in a global economy, and we have a couple of different things here. Our kids that grew up in the neighborhoods, most of them don't get to go to these schools because we need to do a better job preparing them in the elementary and the high school level. But also on the job creation side, I think some folks are just satisfied, like they are with a kid graduating from high school. They're also satisfied with just the construction jobs. And again, when the cranes and the trucks drive away from those construction sites, I want to fight to get the jobs that will be existing in those office buildings for the residents of our city. So we can and must do better, particularly in the global economy, and those are the things that I've been working and focused on as a member of the City Council.
I'm sure you've heard the stories about things going on in East Boston, Eggleston Square, people in some of these properties who are being forced out, and I think even with affordable units, they're not going to have a chance. And anything you see doing to help them, some kind of rent protection? Or
yeah, I mean, we've been talking about, obviously, standing with the expiring use legislation to make sure that when those buildings expire, the tax credits expire, that they either get extended and/or there's some sensible process by which we can protect the affordability of that as opposed to having it go market rate. We're on record as a council of working with tenant activists with respect to just cause evictions. And again, a lot of this is through no fault of anyone else. You have a resident in a neighborhood that's where their support system is, that's where their family is, children, grandchildren, their community health center, their library, their coffee shop, and then someone buys the house, or they flip the property, and then there's a knock on the door that they're going to either double or triple the rent, and/or they're asking that person to leave. And so supporting those types of efforts around linkage, around creation of more affordable housing on the expiring use, as well as the just cause evictions, I think will help go a long way in at least trying to stabilize those situations.
You mentioned getting more diversity in the police and fire department, at least getting more Boston residents on the job. But another issue that's come up is body cameras to maybe guard against possible excessive use of force. Do you think there should be at least a pilot program with that?
Yes, I support Commissioner Evans. I think he's doing a phenomenal job on behalf of our residents. He's extremely accessible. You see him. I'm a citywide city council. I see the commissioner out all across the city, listening to people, engaging people. And one of the things that he's done is he's initiated a pilot program to give this an opportunity to see whether or not it makes sense for Boston. And again, what works in Boston may or may not work in other jurisdictions. What's working in other jurisdictions may not work here in Boston. I think we're uniquely situated, particularly around our community policing efforts. And so I'm willing to work with the commissioner to give this an opportunity. As you know, I chaired the Government Operations Committee, and we had a hearing that was well attended on this specific issue, not just with body cams, but also with dashboard cams. We actually at one point had dashboard cams for, I think, a limited period of time. And then whether it was the technology and/or there was some technical issues with it. So there may be an opportunity for our commissioner, as we're exploring the pilot program for body cams, we also reinstitute, or at least try to get the dashboard cams up and running again. And And then there's obviously the devil's in the details. One of the plans I heard was that the office has to approach the vehicle and explain that, give them the option whether they want the camera to be on or camera to be off. I don't think you can have it both ways. We're either going to have dashboard cams that run and or body cams that run, and I don't think that the officer and or the alleged suspect maybe, or even the motorist, has the option. We're either going to have them, they're going to roll, or we're not going to have them. I think that's sort of, that's been my position on it.
Well, right now in Boston, we have a somewhat divided city about charter school expansion. Some people want a lot of it, some people want either none of it, or at least not quite so much. What about you?
Well, I want good quality schools for all of our neighborhoods, and I don't really care what uniform they wear, whether it's a Boston Public School uniform or a charter school uniform or a parochial school, if one still exists in your neighborhood, or a private school if you're able to afford that. I just want good quality schools. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we boast of the best colleges and universities in the world. We're in a global economy, but yet our kids cannot go to those schools. Some do, but when they do, they struggle to stay in those schools. So I want the best for our kids, and that means lifting the cap. We currently have about 18,000 kids and families on the waiting list for charter schools. Now, charter schools aren't the be-all, end-all. There are also some charter schools that aren't good. So I want to replicate success. Neighborhood Charter School in Dorchester, Collegiate Academy, Excel. There are some really good charter schools that we should be replicating that success. At the same time, competition is good. It's healthy. We have competition in this council race. Competition should exist in education as well. And so if charter schools and parochial schools and private schools are forcing us as a city to look harder, to work smarter, to educate our kids in the Boston Public Schools, then I'm all for that. But I want to make sure that whatever schools we have, be it Boston Public or charter or parochial or private, that they're good quality schools so we can keep families in Boston and allow them to potentially compete to get into good high schools and to compete and get into these great college universities that call Boston their home.
Because we keep hearing about these schools that struggled and they do better, and it's because of these extra programs, and then they take away the money for that. I mean, isn't there a funding problem around this too?
There is a funding, and there should be mechanisms by which we're able to assess and evaluate particular schools, Boston Public Schools too. We shouldn't have to continue to wait for schools to turn around. We shouldn't have to continue to wait for underperforming schools to either be on the brink of receivership or to turn around. We ought to be replicating success, and we ought to be talking about academic excellence and again, emulating those success stories. So if there's something great happening in one neighborhood, we may want to try that and emulate that and make that a reality in another neighborhood. But the funding piece is where I think a lot of the division begins, and that's really polarizing, and it's also politicizing the classroom, and that should never be the case. We ought to take the politics out of the classroom, and we ought to start to get around quality. And what's quality for one person may be different from quality for another person. I want good quality schools throughout all of our neighborhoods so that our kids have a shot and that families want to come to Boston and stay in Boston.
I want to ask you about one other thing on the horizon here, a plan to have IndyCar racing in the Seaport District. I know the city was going to do some work on the streets anyhow, but are you confident that we can do this without either disrupting the neighborhood or paying too much public money for it?
True. Well, one, it's a work in progress, and there's still conversations and contracts that still need to be ironed out, not just with the City of Boston, but with state officials, the Massport Authority, the Convention Center Authority, and the Turnpike Authority. All of those entities need to be approached and need to work out and iron out the details. I would love to be able to host the event. It'd be, I think it'd be a great opportunity for the city, just like, when we host our tall ships, just like when we host NCAA championship games. I'd love to be able to host, drafts, whether it's the NHL or the NFL or the NBA. So those are things that we can and should be doing as a city, because again, you think about lots of our successes in our city and how attractive Boston is. This could be an opportunity to showcase another sporting event. In this instance, it's IndyCar car racing. And if the neighbors are consulted, if the elected leaders and others in the business community are consulted, and if we can put all our minds together, it could be a reality. But right now, it seems to be still a work in progress. And interestingly enough, we're within a year. It's a little less than a year away. So the onus is on the IndyCar folks to get going and to get out to the community and to get those approvals and to get those contracts lined out, because the clock is ticking. And at some point, we hope we're not in a situation similar to the Olympics, where we need to pull the plug on it, and/or any other major event. I think that Boston is home to lots of firsts. We got lots of natural strengths. I believe that we could host an IndyCar event and have it be successful, but devil's in the details. The folks that are running the IndyCar really need to get going and really need to get out there, and it's our hope that that will happen.